Elena Rodriguez sits in her husband's home office, 7 months pregnant and trembling as she dials the number that will change everything. On the other end of the line, Marcus Wellington, the Wall Street golden boy she thought she knew, is in a board meeting discussing his biggest deal, yet $50 million in new client assets. What Marcus doesn't know is that his pregnant wife has discovered his darkest secret. The USB drive she found contains evidence of a massive fraud scheme, $75 million stolen from clients, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and plans to disappear forever with his Instagram influencer Mistress. Wellington Financial Group, Marcus Wellington's office, comes the familiar voice of his secretary. "Janet, this is Elena. I need to speak with Marcus immediately. Tell him it's a family emergency." As Elena waits for her husband to come to the phone, she knows that what she's about to say will destroy his empire, end their marriage, and send him to prison for decades. But she also knows it's the only way to save the hundreds of innocent families he's planning to rob. Like and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and betrayal. The Manhattan skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet night sky, each light representing dreams, ambitions, and lives being lived 40 stories below. In the penthouse of the prestigious Wellington Tower, Elena Rodriguez stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her hand gently caressing her 7-month pregnant belly as she gazed out at the city that had become her kingdom. At 28, Elena had everything a woman could dream of. She was married to Marcus Wellington, the golden boy of Wall Street whose financial empire had made him worth over $500 million by age 35. Their penthouse was a testament to their success. Modern art adorned the walls, Italian marble covered the floors, and every piece of furniture had been carefully selected by Elena's discerning eye for design. The soft sound of jazz music filled the air as Elena moved gracefully around their gourmet kitchen, her pregnant form elegant even in her flowing maternity dress. Tonight was special, their third wedding anniversary. She had spent the entire day preparing Marcus's favorite meal, lobster thermidor, truffle risotto, and a chocolate souffle that had taken her 3 attempts to perfect. "Baby girl, your daddy is going to love this surprise," Elena whispered to her unborn daughter, feeling a gentle kick in response. The nursery down the hall was nearly complete, painted in soft pastels with a custom-designed crib that cost more than most people's cars. Everything was perfect, exactly as Marcus liked it. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Running late with the Henderson deal. This client is worth $50 million, so I need to close it tonight. We'll be at the Plaza Hotel. Love you both." She smiled, understanding as always. Marcus worked incredibly hard to provide their luxurious lifestyle. His company, Wellington Financial Group, managed portfolios for some of the wealthiest families in America. Elena had met him 5 years ago when she was a rising star in architecture, designing innovative skyscrapers that caught the attention of Manhattan's elite. Their whirlwind romance had been the stuff of fairy tales, private jets to Paris, weekend getaways to the Hamptons, and a proposal on a yacht under the Statue of Liberty. Looking at the elaborately set dining table with its crystal glasses and fresh orchids, Elena made a spontaneous decision. Why should Marcus miss their anniversary dinner? Because of work, she could bring the celebration to him. Carefully, she packed the chocolate souffle into an insulated container, along with a bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes. The doorman, Roberto, smiled warmly as he helped her into the black sedan. "Anniversary surprise, Mrs. Wellington?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with the kind of fondness reserved for someone he'd watched grow from a young bride into a glowing, expectant mother. 3 years today. Roberto, can you believe how fast time flies? "Mr. Wellington is a lucky man. Senora, drive safely." The 20-minute ride to the Plaza Hotel gave Elena time to imagine Marcus's face when she walked into his business meeting with dessert. He would probably be embarrassed at first, then charmed by her thoughtfulness. It was exactly the kind of romantic gesture that had defined their relationship. The Plaza Hotel stood majestically on Fifth Avenue, its French Renaissance architecture as impressive as ever. Elena had always loved this hotel Marcus had proposed to her in the Oak Room 3 years ago, and they'd spent their wedding night in the penthouse suite. "I'm here to see Marcus Wellington," Elena told the concierge, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby shifted. "He's in a meeting with the Henderson clients." The concierge, a distinguished man in his 60s, checked his records with a puzzled expression. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wellington, but I don't show any Henderson party registered tonight. However, Mr. Wellington did book the presidential suite on the 15th floor." Elena felt a small flutter of confusion but dismissed it. Maybe the clients preferred privacy, or perhaps Marcus had simply made the reservation under his own name. She thanked the concierge and made her way to the elevator, her excitement building with each floor. The 15th floor was quiet, with plush carpeting that muffled her footsteps as she approached Suite 1500. Elena reached into her purse for the keycard Marcus had given her months ago, a practical gesture since he often forgot his own cards when rushing between meetings. As she slid the card into the lock, Elena paused for a moment, hearing what sounded like laughter from inside. Good, she thought. Marcus was clearly enjoying himself with his clients. Maybe her surprise would be even more welcome after a successful business dinner. The door clicked open, and Elena stepped inside, her arms full of anniversary surprises. What she saw made her freeze as if she'd been plunged into ice water. The suite's living room was empty, but the bedroom door was open, and what Elena could see made her heart stop beating. There, on the king-size bed draped in Egyptian cotton sheets, was her husband. But he wasn't alone, and there were no clients in sight. Marcus Wellington, her husband, the father of her unborn child, was locked in a passionate embrace with a stunning Asian woman Elena recognized immediately from Instagram, Vivian Chen, the fashion blogger with 2 million followers, who was always posting pictures of luxury vacations and designer handbags. The chocolate souffle slipped from Elena's hands, the container crashing to the marble floor with a sound like thunder. Both figures on the bed jerked apart, turning toward the door with expressions of shock and annoyance rather than shame. "Elena," Marcus's voice was sharp, irritated, as if she were an unwelcome interruption rather than his pregnant wife. "What are you doing here?" Elena stood frozen, one hand protectively covering her belly, the other gripping the doorframe for support. The scene before her was like something from a nightmare. Champagne glasses on the nightstand, rose petals scattered across the bed, and Vivian Chen's designer dress crumpled on the floor next to Marcus's Armani suit. Vivian sat up slowly, her long black hair cascading over her bare shoulders, and had the audacity to smile. "Oh my God, Marcus, who is this? Your housekeeper." The casual cruelty of the question hit Elena like a physical blow. This woman knew exactly who she was. Every detail of Elena's life with Marcus had been documented in society magazines and social media posts. Vivian was playing games, establishing dominance in the most vicious way possible. "This is my wife," Marcus said through gritted teeth, but there was no embarrassment in his voice, only annoyance at being caught. "Elena, you shouldn't be here. This is complicated." "Complicated?" Elena's voice came out as a whisper, her throat constricted with shock and hurt. "This is our anniversary. Marcus, I brought you dinner. I thought—" Her voice broke as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tsunami. Vivian reached for her phone, and to Elena's horror, began taking pictures. "This is actually perfect content," she said with a laugh. "The suburban housewife catches the billionaire with his real woman. My followers are going to eat this up." Elena watched in disbelief as Vivian posted a photo to her Instagram story, a picture of Elena standing in the doorway, visibly pregnant, tears streaming down her face, with the caption, "Some people just don't know when to leave." Drama alert, real life. "Stop," Elena whispered, but Vivian was already typing another post. Marcus finally stood up, wrapping a hotel robe around himself, his expression cold and calculating. This wasn't the man Elena had fallen in love with. This stranger had the same face, but his eyes were hard and distant, "Elena, go home," he said, his voice carrying the authority he usually reserved for board meetings. "We'll discuss this later, but right now, you're embarrassing yourself. And me?" The words hit Elena harder than any physical blow could have. After 3 years of marriage, after carrying his child, after building a life together, Marcus was more concerned about his embarrassment than her pain. "I'm embarrassing you." Elena's voice gained strength, fury beginning to burn through the shock. "I'm your wife, Marcus. I'm carrying your daughter. And this is how you—" "Don't make a scene," Marcus interrupted sharply. "Vivian and I are discussing business." Vivian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Elena's eyes swept the room, taking in details she had missed in her initial shock. This wasn't a spontaneous encounter. There were photos scattered on the coffee table, pictures of Marcus and Vivian together in locations Elena recognized. The Eiffel Tower, where Marcus had claimed to be at a financial summit, a beach in Hawaii, where he'd said he was visiting potential investors, a restaurant in Milan, where he'd supposedly been meeting with European clients. Each photo was a dagger to her heart, evidence of a double life that had been going on for months, maybe longer. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice steady now despite the tears streaming down her face. Marcus had the decency to look away. "Elena, this isn't the time." "How long, Marcus?" Vivian answered instead, her voice dripping with satisfaction. 8 months. He was actually with me when you called to tell him about the pregnancy. We laughed about the timing. The cruelty of the revelation nearly brought Elena to her knees. 8 months ago, she had been glowing with the joy of new pregnancy, calling Marcus to share the most wonderful news of their lives. And he had been with this woman, treating Elena's happiness as a joke. Elena's hand moved to her wedding ring, the 5-carat diamond that had once symbolized Marcus's love and commitment. Now it felt like a shackle, a beautiful lie around her finger. "Get out, Elena," Marcus said, his patience clearly exhausted. "We'll talk tomorrow, but right now, you need to leave. You're upsetting yourself, and that can't be good for the baby." The casual dismissal broke something inside Elena. This man, who had once promised to love and cherish her through better or worse, was throwing her out like unwanted furniture. But as she turned to leave, Elena's eyes fell on something that made her blood run cold. There, on the table next to Vivian's purse, was a key to their penthouse. The key to the home she had helped design, the sanctuary where she was preparing to raise their daughter. "You gave her a key to our home." Elena's voice was barely audible. Marcus's silence was answer enough. Elena bent down carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and picked up the pieces of the broken souffle container. As she did, her hand brushed against something else, a USB drive that had fallen from Vivian's purse when she'd reached for her phone. Without thinking, Elena palmed the small device, slipping it into her coat pocket as she stood. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said, her voice steady and cold. "I hope she was worth it." As Elena walked back down the plushly carpeted hallway, she could hear Vivian's laughter echoing behind her. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, but she forced herself to keep moving, to maintain her dignity until she was safely away from the scene of her marriage's destruction. In the elevator, alone at last, Elena finally allowed herself to break down. The woman who had entered the Plaza Hotel as a loving wife was leaving as someone entirely different, a woman who had learned that the life she thought she knew was built on lies. But even through her tears, Elena's mind was beginning to work. The USB drive in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was whispering that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Elena Rodriguez Wellington was already beginning to transform into someone Marcus would never expect, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The rain had started during Elena's taxi ride back to what was no longer home, each drop against the window matching the tears that refused to stop falling. The doorman, Roberto, took one look at her face, and his expression shifted from welcoming warmth to deep concern. "Signor Elena, what happened? Are you hurt?" Should I call a doctor? Elena shook her head, unable to trust her voice. Roberto had worked at Wellington Tower for 15 years. He had watched her transform from Marcus's young girlfriend into his wife, had shared in their joy when they announced the pregnancy. How could she explain that the fairy tale was over? The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal. When the doors finally opened, Elena stepped into a space that now felt foreign and cold. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen artwork, every element of their life together now seemed tainted by Marcus's betrayal. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Vivian's Instagram posts were already going viral, with thousands of comments and shares. Elena couldn't bring herself to read them, but the headlines were clear enough. Millionaire's wife crashes affair. Wellington scandal exposed. Pregnant and humiliated. Elena moved through the penthouse like a ghost, each room holding memories that now felt like lies. The kitchen where she had prepared their anniversary dinner. The living room where they had danced to jazz music just last week. The nursery where she had spent hours planning their daughter's arrival. It was in the nursery that Elena finally collapsed, sitting heavily in the rocking chair she had imagined using to nurse her baby. The room was painted in soft yellows and whites, with a custom crib that Marcus had insisted on buying despite its astronomical cost. "Nothing but the best for our little princess," he had said, kissing Elena's belly. The memory made her sob harder, but as she cried, she felt something else growing inside her, a cold, calculating anger that she had never experienced before. Elena's phone rang, and she saw Marcus's name on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Elena, we need to talk." Marcus's voice was businesslike, as if they were discussing a merger rather than the destruction of their marriage. "Talk." Elena's voice was hoarse from crying. "What's left to say?" "Marcus, look, what you saw tonight, it's not what you think. Vivian and I have a business relationship that sometimes becomes personal, but stop." Elena's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "Just stop lying to me. 8 months. Marcus." She said 8 months. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Elena could hear muffled voices in the background. He was still with her, still with Vivian while his pregnant wife sat alone in their home. "Elena, you're being emotional. We can work through this if you just... I want you to leave." Elena's voice was steady now, cold and final. "I want you out of this house." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Elena, this is my house. My name is on the deed. You have no legal claim to any of this." The casual cruelty of his words revealed a side of Marcus that Elena was only now beginning to see. This wasn't the man she had married, or perhaps it was, and she had been too blinded by love to notice the calculating businessman beneath the charming exterior. "Fine," Elena said quietly. "Then I'll leave." "That's probably best," Marcus agreed. "Take some time to think about this rationally. You're pregnant and emotional. When you calm down, we can discuss how to handle this situation practically." Elena hung up without another word. She sat in the nursery for a long time, processing the conversation. Marcus wasn't planning to end his affair. He was planning to manage it. To her, Elena was now a situation to be handled, not a wife to be cherished. The USB drive in her pocket seemed to pulse with possibility. Elena pulled it out, examining the small device that might hold answers to questions she was only beginning to formulate. She made her way to Marcus's home office, a space she rarely entered. The walls were lined with awards and photographs, Marcus with politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. His computer required a password, but Elena knew it, their wedding date, 06152021. The irony wasn't lost on her as she typed in the numbers that represented what had once been the happiest day of her life. The USB drive contained hundreds of files, but as Elena began to explore them, her confusion grew. These weren't just photos of Marcus and Vivian's affair. They were financial documents, emails, and what appeared to be business correspondence with companies she didn't recognize. Elena's architectural training had taught her to see patterns, to understand how complex systems fit together. As she opened file after file, a pattern began to emerge that made her blood run cold. Wellington Financial Group wasn't just managing money. Marcus appeared to be moving massive amounts of capital through shell companies, accounts in offshore banks, and investment vehicles that seemed designed to hide rather than grow wealth. One email thread caught her attention. From WellingtonWFG.com to V. Chen, consultingedgemail.com, subject Cayman transfer. Phase 3V. The next 20 amendment clears tomorrow. Phase 3 should be complete by month end. Make sure your contact in Grand Cayman confirms receipt. We're almost ready for the final phase. M from V. Chen, consultingedgemail.com to MWellingtonWFG.com, subject RE. Cayman transfer, phase 3, perfect. Tony says everything is ready on the Switzerland end. After the final transfer, we disappear just like we planned. The wife will never know what hit her. See you tonight. Violena read the exchange 3 times before the full implications sank in. This wasn't just an affair, it was an elaborate scheme to steal money and disappear. Vivian wasn't Marcus's mistress, she was his partner in what appeared to be a massive financial fraud. With shaking hands, Elena opened more files. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Communications with a mysterious Tony about Swiss bank accounts. Most damning of all, a spreadsheet titled Exit Strategy that detailed how Marcus planned to liquidate Wellington Financial Group's assets and vanish with over $50 million. The final entry in the exit strategy was dated just 2 weeks away. Final transfer, $15 million. Disappear with V, leave no trace. Elena stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Not only was Marcus planning to abandon her and their unborn daughter, but he was planning to steal millions of dollars from his clients' money that belonged to pension funds, charitable foundations, and families who trusted him with their life savings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Elena, I'm coming home to get some clothes. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Elena quickly copied all the files from the USB drive to her laptop, then to a cloud storage account she created under her maiden name. As she worked, she noticed something else that made her gasp. Among Marcus's personal files was a folder labeled Elena Insurance. Inside were documents she had never seen before, life insurance policies taken out on her, with Marcus as the sole beneficiary, totaling over $10 million. The policies had been purchased just 6 months ago, right around the time Elena's pregnancy had begun to show. The implications made Elena feel sick. If something happened to her, if she died in childbirth or in an accident, Marcus would not only be free to disappear with Vivian, but would also receive $10 million for his trouble. Elena heard the elevator ding in the hallway and quickly shut down the computer. Marcus was home. She met him in the living room, where he moved with the casual confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. He looked exactly the same as he had hours earlier, perfectly groomed, expensive suit, the same handsome face that had charmed her into marriage. But now Elena could see what she had missed before the coldness in his eyes, the calculating way he assessed every situation for personal advantage. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Marcus said, pulling clothes from their bedroom closet. I'll be staying at the office for a few days while we figure out next steps. Next steps? Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus paused in his packing, studying her face. Elena, I know this is difficult, but we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while. We want different things. You want a family and stability. I need freedom to build my empire. What about our daughter? What about her? Marcus's tone was dismissive. You'll be fine. You're smart, capable. You'll find someone else eventually, someone who wants the same suburban life you do. Elena watched her husband of 3 years pack his belongings as if he were checking out of a hotel rather than abandoning his family. There was no remorse, no sadness, no acknowledgement of the pain he was causing. This was simply a business decision to him. Marcus, Elena said as he headed toward the door with his suitcase, What if I don't want a divorce? He turned back to her with a smile that made her skin crawl. Elena, you don't really have a choice. I could make this very difficult for you if I wanted to. You have no money of your own, no job, no independent income. Everything you have comes from me. I'd suggest you make this easy on yourself. After Marcus left, Elena sat alone in the penthouse that no longer felt like home, processing everything she had learned. Her husband wasn't just unfaithful, he was a criminal who was planning to abandon her with nothing while he started a new life with stolen money. But Elena Rodriguez had not built a successful architectural career by backing down from challenges. She had designed buildings that defied gravity, created structures that seemed impossible, and now she was going to engineer the downfall of the man who had tried to destroy her. Elena reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in over 2 years. David Kim Law Offices. This is David. David, it's Elena Rodriguez. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line. David Kim had been Elena's study partner at Harvard, one of the few people who had never been impressed by Marcus's wealth and charm. He had specialized in financial law and had built a reputation as someone who fought for justice, regardless of his opponent's power. Elena, it's been too long. What's going on? I think my husband is stealing millions of dollars, and I have proof. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'll clear my schedule, David said immediately. Elena, are you safe? Do you need protection? Elena looked around the penthouse that Marcus could take away from her at any moment, thought about the $10 million in life insurance policies, and made a decision that would change everything. Not yet, she said, but I will be. As Elena hung up the phone, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of a challenge worthy of her intelligence. Marcus Wellington had made a critical error in judgment. He had underestimated the woman he married, treating her like a decorative accessory rather than the brilliant strategist she was. Elena placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks. Don't worry, baby girl, she whispered. Mommy is going to make sure you grow up in a world where justice still matters. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered with the same beauty as always. But Elena was no longer the same woman who had gazed out at it hours earlier. That woman had been naive, trusting, dependent on a man who saw her as disposable. The woman sitting in the darkness now was someone entirely different, a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And she was about to become Marcus Wellington's worst nightmare. The law offices of Kim and Associates occupied the 23rd floor of a sleek building in Midtown Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city where power and money changed hands like poker chips. Elena arrived early, wearing a simple black dress that disguised her pregnancy while projecting an image of professional competence. David Kim looked exactly as Elena remembered from their Harvard days: sharp suit, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of focused intensity that made opposing lawyers nervous. What was different was the respect he commanded. His office walls were lined with awards for fighting financial fraud and protecting whistleblowers. Elena, David stood to greet her, his expression mixing warmth with professional concern. You look... He paused, clearly noting her pregnancy and the stress lines around her eyes. How far along are you? 7 months, Elena replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. David, I need to know if what I found is what I think it is. And if it is, I need to know what to do about it. Elena opened her laptop and began showing David the files she had discovered. As he reviewed the documents, his expression grew increasingly grave. After an hour of examining bank statements, email communications, and transfer records, David leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Elena, this isn't just an affair. Your husband is running one of the most sophisticated financial frauds I've ever seen. He's systematically looting his clients' accounts and funneling the money through shell companies to offshore accounts. How much money are we talking about? Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. David pulled up a calculator and began entering figures. Based on what you've shown me, I estimate Marcus has already moved approximately $60 million offshore, with plans to steal another $15 million before he disappears. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. $75 million money that belonged to retirees, charities, and families who had trusted Marcus with their life savings. There's something else, David continued, his voice gentle but serious. The life insurance policies you found? Elena, you need to understand that you could be in real danger. Men who steal this amount of money don't usually leave loose ends. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on Marcus's betrayal that she hadn't fully processed the implications of her own situation. A grieving widower would be far less suspicious than a man abandoning his pregnant wife. What are my options? Elena asked. David studied her carefully. You could file for divorce and try to claim half the assets, but Marcus would likely claim the money was lost in bad investments. You could go to the police, but financial fraud cases are complex and take years to prosecute. Or what? You could become a whistleblower. The SEC has a program that rewards people who report financial fraud. If they recover money based on your information, you could receive 10 to 30% of the recovered funds. Elena did the math quickly. Even 10% of $75 million would be more than enough to secure her daughter's future and help Marcus's victims recover their stolen money. What would that involve? You would need to provide evidence to the SEC and FBI. They would investigate, and if they find grounds for prosecution, they would arrest Marcus and freeze his assets. The downside is that once you make that call, there's no going back. Marcus will know you're responsible, and men like him don't forgive that kind of betrayal. Elena thought about Marcus's cold dismissal the night before, about Vivian's cruel laughter, about the months of lies and the plans to abandon her with nothing. Then she thought about her daughter, who deserved better than a father who was a criminal and a coward. David, I need you to explain exactly how this works. Over the next 3 hours, David walked Elena through the whistleblower process. They organized the evidence into a comprehensive package that detailed Marcus's fraud scheme, identified the offshore accounts, and provided a timeline of the transfers. David also helped Elena understand her legal rights and protections as a whistleblower. Elena, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once you make this call, your marriage is over, and Marcus will likely face decades in prison. This will also become very public very quickly. Elena thought about the woman she had been just 24 hours earlier, trusting, dependent, willing to overlook red flags because she loved her husband. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes love meant protecting others from the person you once trusted. My marriage was over the moment Marcus chose to steal from innocent people, Elena said firmly. I won't be complicit in that, and I won't let my daughter grow up thinking this kind of behavior is acceptable. David nodded with admiration. Then let's make the call. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she dialed the SEC whistleblower hotline. When the operator answered, Elena's voice was steady and clear. My name is Elena Rodriguez Wellington, and I have evidence of a major financial fraud being committed by Wellington Financial Group. I believe my husband has stolen over $70 million from his clients and is planning to flee the country. Within 2 hours, Elena was sitting in a conference room at the SEC's New York office, facing Agent Sarah Collins and Detective Michael Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Both were seasoned investigators who had seen every kind of financial scam imaginable, but even they seemed impressed by the scope of Marcus's operation. Mrs. Wellington, Agent Collins said after reviewing the evidence, this is one of the most comprehensive fraud schemes we've encountered. Your husband has been planning this for at least 2 years. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the exit strategy. This is the work of someone with sophisticated knowledge of international banking laws. Detective Torres leaned forward. What we're particularly concerned about is this Vivian Chen. Our preliminary research suggests she's not who she claims to be. The social media presence, the fashion blogger persona, it appears to be an elaborate cover identity. Elena felt another shock of realization. You mean she's a professional criminal? We believe she may be part of an organized group that targets wealthy men for this type of long-term fraud, Agent Collins explained. The pattern is always the same: seduce the target, gain their trust, help them steal money, then disappear. The investigation moved with surprising speed. By the next morning, federal agents had obtained warrants to monitor Marcus's communications and freeze his offshore accounts. Elena learned that Marcus wasn't just stealing from individual clients, he had been siphoning money from pension funds, charitable endowments, and university foundations. Elena spent the day providing detailed testimony about Marcus's behavior, his recent travels, and any conversations that might provide insight into his plans. As she spoke, she realized how many warning signs she had missed: the mysterious phone calls, the sudden interest in international banking, the way Marcus had been pushing her to sign legal documents she didn't fully understand. Mrs. Wellington, Detective Torres said as they concluded the day's session, I want you to understand that your husband is likely to be arrested within the next 48 hours. Once that happens, this story will become public. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about the media attention, the invasion of privacy, the way her life would be dissected by strangers. Then she thought about the families who would lose their retirement savings if Marcus succeeded in his plan. I'm prepared, she said. That evening, Elena returned to the penthouse to find Marcus already there, packing more of his belongings. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we've been too hasty about this whole situation? Elena studied her husband's face, looking for any sign of the man she had once loved. All she saw was calculation. Marcus was clearly concerned about something and was trying to manipulate her back into compliance. What do you mean? Elena asked carefully. Marcus moved closer to her, his voice taking on the charming tone that had once made her feel like the most important person in the world. I mean, maybe we can work through this. The affair with Vivian, it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. I don't want to lose you and our daughter over something so meaningless. Elena felt a flash of anger at his casual dismissal of months of betrayal, but she kept her expression neutral. And what about Vivian? Are you planning to end things with her? Already done, Marcus said smoothly. I told her this morning that it was over. She didn't take it well, but that's her problem. Elena knew this was a lie. The FBI was monitoring Marcus's communications, and he had spoken to Vivian for over an hour that morning, confirming plans for their final money transfer. I'm glad to hear that, Elena said, forcing herself to smile. Maybe we can try counseling. Marcus's relief was visible. Exactly, we just need to communicate better. Elena, I know I haven't always been the perfect husband, but I love you and our daughter. I want us to be a family. Elena nodded and allowed Marcus to embrace her, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to pull away. As he held her, Marcus whispered in her ear, I knew you'd be reasonable. You're too smart to throw away everything we've built together. What Marcus didn't know was that Elena was wearing a wire, and every word of his manipulation was being recorded by federal agents. His attempt to convince her that Vivian was meaningless, while simultaneously planning to flee the country with her, would be powerful evidence of his deception and criminal intent. That night, as Marcus slept beside her, Elena lay awake thinking about the phone call that would change everything. In less than 12 hours, Agent Collins would give the signal, and Elena would make the call that would bring down Marcus's criminal empire. Elena placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's movements. Tomorrow, baby girl, we start building a world where people like your father can't hurt innocent families. It's going to be scary, but sometimes doing the right thing requires courage. As the first light of dawn crept through the bedroom windows, Elena Rodriguez Wellington prepared to make the most important call of her life, the call that would end Marcus's career and begin her transformation from victim to hero. The morning of reckoning dawned crisp and clear over Manhattan, with autumn sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows like spotlights illuminating a stage. Elena stood in the kitchen, mechanically preparing breakfast while Marcus showered, her phone heavy in her pocket like a loaded weapon. At exactly 9:30 a.m., Agent Collins would give her the signal. At 9:01 a.m., Elena would make the call that would destroy the man she had once promised to love forever. Marcus emerged from the bedroom dressed in his signature Armani suit, looking every inch the successful Wall Street executive. He kissed Elena's cheek with practiced affection, playing the role of the reformed husband. "I have an important board meeting this morning," he said, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "The Henderson deal is finally closing $50 million in new assets under management. This could be the biggest day in Wellington Financial's history." Elena nodded, knowing that Marcus wasn't planning to manage those assets. He was planning to steal them and disappear forever. The irony was that today would indeed be the biggest day in Wellington Financial's history, just not in the way Marcus imagined. "Will you be home for dinner?" Elena asked, maintaining the charade of marital normalcy. "Absolutely. I want us to start fresh. Elena, no more secrets, no more lies." After Marcus left, Elena sat in the living room, watching the morning news while waiting for her phone to ring. A financial reporter was discussing market trends, completely unaware that one of Wall Street's most respected firms was hours away from being exposed as a criminal enterprise. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Collins. "We're ready. Make the call." Elena walked to Marcus's home office, the room where she had discovered the evidence that would destroy him. She sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the awards and photographs that celebrated his fraudulent success, and dialed the number that would change everything. "Wellington Financial Group, Marcus Wellington's office," came the familiar voice of Janet, Marcus's longtime secretary. "Janet, this is Elena. I need to speak with Marcus immediately. Tell him it's a family emergency." "Of course, Mrs. Wellington. He's in the board meeting, but I'll get him right away." Elena waited, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Marcus's voice came on the line. "Elena, what's wrong? Is it the baby?" For just a moment, Elena heard genuine concern in his voice, and she almost wavered. Then she remembered Vivian's cruel laughter, the stolen money, the life insurance policies, and her resolve hardened. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "The FBI is on their way to your office. In approximately 15 minutes, you're going to be arrested for financial fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Elena could hear the murmur of voices in the background. The board meeting was still in session. "Elena, what are you talking about? This isn't funny." "I found the USB drive. Marcus, I know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the $75 million you've stolen. I know about your plan to disappear with Vivian. I know everything." Another long silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was cold and dangerous. "Elena, you have no idea what you're doing. If you've spoken to anyone about this, if you've made accusations, I've given everything to the SEC and FBI." Elena interrupted. "Every document, every email, every bank record. They have enough evidence to convict you 10 times over." Elena could hear Marcus breathing heavily, could imagine him processing the implications of her words. His entire world was about to collapse, and he was finally beginning to understand that his pregnant wife was the architect of his destruction. "You stupid bitch," Marcus hissed, his cultured voice turning ugly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what this means?" "It means justice," Elena replied calmly. "It means the families you've stolen from will get their money back. It means our daughter won't grow up with a criminal for a father." "Our daughter," Marcus laughed harshly. "You think I care about that kid, Elena? You were never anything more than a convenient cover story." The perfect wife, the beautiful home, the baby on the way, it was all part of the image I needed to maintain while I built my real life with Vivian. The cruelty of his words was like a knife to Elena's heart, but she had expected this. Men like Marcus always revealed their true nature when cornered. "The life you built with Vivian is over too," Elena said. "The FBI arrested her an hour ago. She's already given them a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence." This wasn't true. Vivian hadn't been arrested yet, but Elena wanted Marcus to understand that he was completely alone. "You're lying," Marcus said, but she could hear the doubt in his voice. "Her real name is Victoria Chen, and she's wanted in 3 countries for financial fraud. The fashion blogger persona was a complete fabrication. She's part of an organized crime ring that specializes in seducing wealthy men and stealing their money. You weren't her partner. Marcus, you were her mark." Elena heard commotion in the background, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the sound of doors opening and closing. "Marcus Wellington." A authoritative voice came through the phone. "FBI, you're under arrest." "Elena." Marcus's voice was desperate now, the polished businessman facade completely gone. "Elena, please think about what you're doing. I can fix this. I can pay the money back." "It's too late, Marcus," Elena said softly. "You made your choice when you decided our family meant nothing to you." Elena could hear Agent Collins reading Marcus his rights. Could imagine the scene in the boardroom as Wellington Financial Group's executives watched their CEO being led away in handcuffs. The company's stock price would collapse within hours, but the client's money would be safe. "Mrs. Wellington," Agent Collins' voice came through the phone. "It's done. He's in custody." Elena hung up and sat in Marcus's chair for a long moment, processing what she had just accomplished. In the space of a single phone call, she had brought down a criminal empire, ensured justice for hundreds of victims, and secured a future for her daughter that didn't include the shame of a father's crimes. The penthouse felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of Marcus's lies had been physically removed from the space. Elena walked through the rooms that had once represented her dream life, seeing them clearly for the first time. Every expensive piece of furniture, every luxury appliance, every designer decoration had been purchased with stolen money. This wasn't a home, it was a monument to greed and deception. Elena's phone rang continuously for the next hour, as news of Marcus's arrest spread through the financial world. Reporters wanted statements, colleagues wanted explanations, and social media exploded with speculation about the scandal. Elena ignored them all, focused instead on the calls that mattered. David Kim called to congratulate her on her courage and to discuss the legal implications of Marcus's arrest. The SEC called to schedule additional interviews for their ongoing investigation. Most importantly, Agent Collins called to tell her that they had already begun the process of freezing and recovering the stolen funds. "Elena, I want you to know that what you did today took incredible courage," Agent Collins said. "Most people in your situation would have looked the other way, chosen to protect their comfortable lifestyle rather than do the right thing. You've saved hundreds of families from financial ruin." As the day progressed, Elena learned more about the scope of Marcus's crimes. The FBI had arrested Vivian at JFK Airport as she attempted to board a flight to Zurich with $2 million in cash. They had also arrested Tony, who turned out to be a money launderer working for an international crime syndicate. The investigation was revealing connections to similar frauds across the country. With Marcus's scheme being one of the largest in recent history, the media coverage was intense but largely supportive. Elena was portrayed as a courageous whistleblower who had risked everything to stop her husband's crimes. The headlines read, "Pregnant Wife's Courage Brings Down Financial Empire," "The Phone Call That Saved Millions," and "Elena Wellington, Hero or Victim." That evening, Elena sat in the nursery she had so carefully prepared, surrounded by baby clothes and toys that would now need to be returned or donated. Everything in this room had been purchased with stolen money, and Elena couldn't bear the thought of raising her daughter surrounded by the proceeds of other families' suffering. Her phone rang one final time that day. The caller ID showed Federal Correctional Facility. "Elena," Marcus's voice was broken, defeated. "Please, I need to talk to you." "And what do you want?" "Marcus, I want to explain. I want you to understand why I did what I did." Elena listened as Marcus attempted to justify his crimes, blaming the pressure of Wall Street, the expectations of success, the addictive nature of making money. He spoke of his relationship with Vivian as if it had been a moment of weakness rather than months of calculated betrayal. I never meant for it to go this far, Marcus said. It started small, just moving some money around to make the numbers look better. But then it grew, and I couldn't stop it without destroying everything I'd built. So you decided to destroy innocent families instead, Elena replied. Elena, please. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. I love our daughter. We can get through this together. Elena felt a wave of sadness for the man Marcus might have been, for the life they might have had if he had made different choices. But that man and that life were illusions, fantasies built on a foundation of lies. Marcus, I hope you find a way to live with what you've done, Elena said. I hope you use your time in prison to become a better person, but we're done. Our daughter and I are going to build a life based on truth and justice, not greed and deception. Elena hung up and turned off her phone. Outside her window, Manhattan glittered in the darkness. But for the first time in months, Elena felt at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal proceedings, financial uncertainty, the task of rebuilding her life as a single mother. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had chosen justice over comfort, truth over lies, and the future over the past. As Elena prepared for bed, she felt her daughter kick strongly, as if applauding her mother's courage. You're going to grow up in a better world, baby girl, Elena whispered to her belly. A world where people who hurt others face consequences, where truth matters more than money, and where your mother isn't afraid to fight for what's right. The phone call was over, but Elena Rodriguez's real story was just beginning. 6 months after the phone call that shattered her world and rebuilt it stronger, Elena Rodriguez stood in the courthouse where Marcus's sentencing was about to take place. Her 3-month-old daughter, Isabella, slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that today would mark the final chapter of her father's criminal career. Elena no longer carried the Wellington name. She had legally reverted to Rodriguez the day Isabella was born, symbolically reclaiming her identity and ensuring her daughter would grow up without the burden of her father's shame. The change had been liberating. Elena Rodriguez was a woman who made her own choices, built her own success, and answered to no one but herself and her daughter. The courthouse was packed with media, federal agents, and victims of Marcus's fraud. Elena recognized many faces from the support group she had started for families affected by financial crime. There was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman whose retirement savings Marcus had stolen. David Martinez, the teacher whose daughter's college fund had vanished into Marcus's offshore accounts. The Morrison family, who had lost their home when Marcus looted their investment portfolio. These were the real victims of Marcus's crimes, not Elena, who had emerged from the ashes of her marriage stronger and more purposeful than ever before. Agent Collins approached Elena as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Are you ready for this? Elena nodded, adjusting Isabella's blanket. I've been ready for months. The investigation had continued to expand after Marcus's arrest, ultimately revealing a fraud scheme worth over $100 million. Marcus had been stealing from clients for nearly 3 years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to hide his crimes. The prosecution's case was so overwhelming that Marcus had eventually agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of 22 years in federal prison. Vivian, whose real name was indeed Victoria Chen, had cooperated fully with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. Her testimony had revealed the full scope of the international crime ring that had targeted wealthy Americans like Marcus. Victoria had admitted that seducing Marcus and convincing him to expand his fraud had been her assignment from the criminal organization. As Elena entered the courtroom, she saw Marcus for the first time since his arrest. He looked older, smaller somehow, dressed in an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual Armani suits. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Elena felt no anger, no hatred, only sadness for the man he might have been, and relief that her daughter would never know him as the father Elena had once imagined. Judge Williams called the court to order, and the sentencing hearing began. Victim after victim stood to tell their stories how Marcus's theft had destroyed their dreams, ruined their retirements, and shattered their trust in the financial system. Elena listened to each testimony, holding Isabella closer, knowing that her decision to speak out had given these people a voice and a chance at justice. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood carefully, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the court. Your Honor, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today. I know that many people see me as Marcus Wellington's victim, but I want to be clear about something. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And more importantly, I am the mother of a daughter who will grow up knowing that doing the right thing matters more than protecting comfortable lies. Elena paused, looking directly at Marcus, who was staring at his hands. Marcus, I hope that your time in prison teaches you something, that all your money and success never could. That real strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down. That true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in the trust and love of the people around you. And that the most important legacy any parent can leave is teaching their children to choose integrity over convenience. Elena's voice softened slightly. I forgive you, Marcus, not because you deserve it, but because Isabella deserves to grow up free from the poison of hatred. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean that actions don't have consequences. Judge Williams nodded solemnly before delivering the sentence: 22 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Marcus would be nearly 60 when he was released if he lived that long. As the bailiff led Marcus away, he turned one last time to look at Elena and Isabella. Elena saw tears in his eyes, but she also saw something else: acceptance. Perhaps finally, Marcus understood the true cost of his choices. Outside the courthouse, Elena faced a barrage of reporters and cameras. She had become something of a media sensation, the pregnant wife who brought down a financial empire, the whistleblower who chose justice over luxury, the single mother building a new life from the ashes of betrayal. Mrs. Rodriguez, called a reporter from CNN. What's next for you and Isabella? Elena smiled, feeling the weight of possibility rather than burden. We're building something beautiful, something real. The transformation of Elena's life had been remarkable. The SEC whistleblower reward had been substantial: 15% of the recovered funds, totaling over $15 million. But Elena had kept only what she needed to secure Isabella's future and donated the rest to organizations supporting victims of financial fraud. With the remaining money, Elena had done something that would have been impossible during her marriage. She had started her own architectural firm, Rodriguez Designs, specializing in affordable housing and community development projects. Her first major project was designing a community center in the Bronx neighborhood where she had grown up, bringing opportunity and hope to an area that had been neglected by traditional developers. The Rodriguez Foundation, established with Elena's whistleblower reward, provided emergency assistance to families who had lost their savings to financial fraud. The foundation also funded financial literacy programs in schools and communities, teaching people how to protect themselves from schemes like Marcus's. Elena had also written a book about her experience, titled The Call That Changed Everything: A Mother's Fight for Justice. The book had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to victim assistance programs. Elena's story had inspired women around the world to speak out against injustice, regardless of the personal cost. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, Elena stood in the penthouse she had once shared with him, now empty and ready for new owners. The space felt different without the weight of lies and stolen money, just an expensive apartment with beautiful views. Nothing more. Isabella, now 9 months old, babbled happily as Elena carried her through the rooms one last time. The nursery that Elena had so carefully prepared was bare now, the expensive furniture donated to a women's shelter. Isabella's new nursery in Elena's modest but comfortable apartment in the village was furnished with items Elena had chosen herself, paid for with money she had earned honestly. As Elena prepared to leave the penthouse forever, she thought about the woman she had been when she first walked through these rooms. That woman had been naive, dependent, willing to overlook warning signs because she was blinded by love and luxury. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable. Elena's phone rang as she reached the elevator. The caller ID showed Rivera, James, Dr. James Rivera, the pediatric oncologist she had been dating for the past 3 months. They had met at a fundraiser for the Rodriguez Foundation, where James had been volunteering his medical expertise. Elena, how did it go today? It's over, Elena said simply. Marcus got 22 years. The victims are getting their money back. It's really over. And how are you feeling? Elena considered the question as the elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying her away from the last remnant of her old life. Free, she said finally. For the first time in years. I feel completely free. James was waiting for her in the lobby, his kind eyes full of understanding and support. He had known Elena's story from the beginning, had seen her at her most vulnerable moments, and had chosen to love both her and Isabella without reservation. Ready to go home? He asked, taking Isabella's carrier and offering Elena his arm. Elena looked back once at the building that had represented everything she thought she wanted, then turned toward the street where her real life was waiting. More than ready, she said. As they walked away together, Elena, James, and Isabella, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The phone call that had ended Marcus's career had also begun Elena's transformation from victim to survivor to advocate for justice. Isabella would grow up hearing the story of how her mother had chosen courage over comfort, justice over luxury, truth over lies. She would learn that real strength comes not from the ability to destroy others, but from the courage to protect them. She would understand that the most important call anyone can make is the call to do what's right, regardless of the cost. The Manhattan skyline glittered around them as they made their way home, but Elena no longer needed its validation. She had found something more valuable than all the luxury Marcus's money could buy: the knowledge that she was exactly who she was meant to be. Elena Rodriguez, architect, mother, advocate, survivor, was finally home. The office of Rodriguez Designs occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the Manhattan skyline across the East River. Elena stood before a presentation board, explaining her latest project to a room full of investors and community leaders. The Sunset Park Community Complex will provide affordable housing for 200 families, along with childcare facilities, a health clinic, and educational programs, Elena explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to build dreams on solid foundations rather than shifting sand. At 33, Elena Rodriguez had become one of New York's most respected architects. Known for projects that prioritize community impact over profit margins, her firm had designed affordable housing developments, community centers, and schools throughout the city, proving that beautiful, functional architecture didn't have to be a luxury available only to the wealthy. In the corner of the conference room, 5-year-old Isabella Rodriguez played quietly with building blocks, unconsciously mimicking her mother's profession. Isabella was a bright, confident child who had never known want or instability. Despite growing up without a father, she attended an excellent public school in Park Slope, took violin lessons on Saturdays, and spent her summers at a camp for children interested in science and engineering. Mrs. Rodriguez, asked a city council member, what makes you confident this project will succeed where others have failed? Elena smiled, the same brilliant smile that had once charmed Manhattan society, but now served a deeper purpose. Because we're not just building housing, we're building community. Every family who moves into Sunset Park will have access to job training, financial literacy programs, and educational support. We're not just giving people homes, we're giving them the tools to build better lives. After the presentation concluded successfully, the project had been approved for full funding. Elena gathered her materials while Isabella carefully put away her blocks. Mommy, are you building houses for people who don't have money? Isabella asked with the directness that only children possessed. That's right, sweetheart. Everyone deserves a safe, beautiful place to live, not just people with lots of money. Isabella nodded seriously. At 5, she already understood concepts of fairness and justice that had taken Elena years to fully grasp. It was a gift Elena was determined to nurture, the ability to see the world clearly and fight for what was right. As they prepared to leave the office, Elena's assistant handed her a folder. This came by courier today. It's marked personal. Elena recognized the return address immediately: Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville. Marcus had been writing to her regularly for the past 2 years, letters that Elena read but never answered. His most recent correspondence had included a request that surprised her. He wanted to sign away his parental rights to Isabella, clearing the way for James to formally adopt her if he and Elena decided to marry. Elena opened the latest letter as Isabella played nearby. Elena, I know you may never read this, but I need to try one more time to tell you how sorry I am. Not just for the money I stole or the lives I destroyed, but for the man I became. I let greed and arrogance poison everything good in my life, including the love of the most incredible woman I've ever known. I've been taking classes here, psychology, ethics, even some courses on financial planning for nonprofits. I'm trying to understand how I became someone I don't recognize. The therapist says I may never fully understand it, but I can choose to be different going forward. I know Isabella doesn't know me, and maybe that's for the best, but if she ever asks about her biological father, please tell her that he learned too late that the only wealth that matters is the love of family and the respect of community. Tell her that her mother is the bravest person I've ever known, and that watching her choose justice over comfort saved not just hundreds of families, but also my soul. I've enclosed the papers my lawyer prepared. I'm giving up all legal claims to Isabella. James Rivera seems like a good man who will love her the way she deserves. I hope you'll both be very happy. With love and regret. Marcus. Elena folded the letter carefully and put it in her purse. She would add it to the box of Marcus's correspondence that she kept for Isabella not to read now, but perhaps someday when she was old enough to understand the complex story of her origins. Mommy, is Daddy James picking us up? Isabella asked, using the name she had started calling James 6 months earlier. Yeah, my sweetheart. He's taking us to dinner at Grandma Maria's house. Elena's mother had embraced James completely, often joking that he was the son-in-law she had prayed for. Maria Rodriguez had watched her daughter transform from a heartbroken victim into a force for justice and community change, and she couldn't be prouder. James arrived precisely on time, as always. Dr. James Rivera had completed his fellowship in pediatric oncology and now directed a program providing free cancer treatment to underserved communities. He and Elena shared not just love, but a commitment to using their talents to help others. How did the presentation go? James asked, kissing Elena softly while Isabella hugged his legs. Funded in full, Elena replied. 200 families will have homes by next Christmas. And I helped, Isabella announced. I drew pictures of the playground. James lifted Isabella onto his shoulders, and she giggled with delight. Watching them together, Elena felt a peace she had never experienced during her marriage to Marcus. This was what love looked like when it was based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. As they drove through Brooklyn toward Maria's house, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 5 years ago, she had made a phone call that destroyed her marriage, ended her husband's career, and forced her to rebuild her entire life from scratch. It had been the most difficult and the most important decision she had ever made. The financial world had moved on from the Wellington scandal, but its impact continued to ripple outward. New regulations had been implemented to prevent similar frauds. Investor protection programs had been strengthened. Most importantly, hundreds of families had recovered their stolen money and learned to trust again. Elena's whistleblower case had become a landmark precedent, encouraging others to speak out against financial crime. She received letters regularly from people who had found the courage to report fraud because of her example. Each letter reminded Elena that her decision to choose justice over comfort had consequences far beyond her own life. Mommy, Isabella said as they pulled into Maria's driveway, why do you help people you don't know? Elena considered how to explain complex concepts of social responsibility to a 5-year-old. Because helping others makes the whole world better, Isabella, And because when we have the power to do good, we have the responsibility to use it. Isabella nodded solemnly, filing away another lesson in the education that would shape her into the woman Elena hoped she would become. That evening, as the family gathered around Maria's dinner table, Elena, James, Isabella, and Grandma. Maria Elena felt the deep satisfaction of a life built on solid ground. There were no secrets, no lies, no money that didn't belong to them. Everything they had earned honestly. James raised his glass of wine for a toast. To Elena, who taught us all that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing despite being afraid. To Mommy, Isabella echoed, raising her cup of apple juice. To family, Elena replied, looking around the table at the people who loved her, not for what she could provide, but for who she was. Later that night, after Isabella was asleep and James had gone home, Elena sat in her study working on plans for her next project, a financial literacy center that would teach young women how to protect themselves from predatory schemes. As she worked, Elena thought about the woman she had been 5 years earlier, the woman who had trusted blindly and depended entirely on a man who saw her as disposable. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth, who fought for what was right, and who had learned that the most important call anyone can make is the call to stand up for justice, regardless of the cost. Elena's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but Elena recognized the pattern. It was someone calling the number she maintained for victims of financial fraud who needed help or advice. Elena Rodriguez, she answered. Ms. Rodriguez, my name is Sarah Chen. I think my husband is stealing money from his company, and I don't know what to do. Elena smiled, feeling the familiar rush of purpose that came with each new opportunity to help someone find their courage. Sarah, you've called the right person. Let me tell you what I've learned about the power of making the right call, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. As Elena began to share her wisdom with another woman facing an impossible choice, she knew that her story, the story that began with betrayal and heartbreak but transformed into justice and redemption, would continue to ripple outward, touching lives she would never know, inspiring courage she would never see. The call that had ended Marcus Wellington's career had become something much larger, a calling to help others find their strength, their voice, and their power to change the world one brave decision at a time. Outside her window, the lights of Manhattan glittered in the darkness. But Elena no longer needed their validation. She had found something more valuable than all the luxury Marcus's stolen money could buy: the knowledge that she was exactly who she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Elena Rodriguez, architect, mother, advocate, survivor, and hero, was finally, completely, home.